alien abductions, UFO sightings, and alien-human hybrid babies that will have you going, "Aw, that's awful." Today's episode is all about them aliens, also known as ALZUROS. This is a special occasion since over 1 million people plan on raiding Area 51 soon. Rest in peace. Hopefully they find some aliens and figure out where the old Megapack Lunchables are being held. Give me back my deep dish, please. Anyway, enjoy these allegedly true scary stories. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org/submit. Now, let's begin. Old Friends from KLENG K. Back when I was 5 years old in 1996, my parents and I lived in a camper near the lake in Lake Worth, Texas, while our house was being built elsewhere. It was a nice location in an RV park, with the lake being less than 100 meters away and plenty of kind neighbors and other kids to play with. I often played outside by myself while everyone else was busy, and once was almost crushed by a random falling tree branch. I had heard the crack and looked up to see it falling straight down at me, and only just managed to scream and run out of the way in time, hearing a thud right after. There was a puff of fine Texas sand surrounding the branch that was at least as big as I was at the time, but that's beside the point. You see, I have these memories. They're very vivid, very detailed, though some are missing. These are memories I know aren't a dream, but they're too bizarre to be believable or real. I fully believe that I may have been abducted at one point in my life. I remember sitting in a room that was dimly lit, but there was still enough light to be able to make things out. Somehow I'd gotten changed in what can be compared to as a hospital gown, and fittingly I was lying in a hospital bed, or something akin to it. The room was large enough to accommodate at least 8 other beds besides my own, but it was bare, save for a few small metal tables of strange tools nearby, and a single large closed door in the middle of the wall I was facing. The whole room, as well as the floor and door, seemed to be made of some sort of shiny dark blue metal, the kind of blue you'd expect to see right before the sun disappears behind the horizon. The door appeared to open in the middle, and had what seemed to be darker blue lines etched into it. I assumed it was decorative. I was not in this room alone, however. There were about 4 to 5 beings in front of me, all of average human height, maybe 5'6" to 5'10". But they weren't human. They had smoky gray skin and your typical gray alien-shaped heads and eyes, only not nearly as exaggerated, with lipless mouths and no nose at all. Each hand had 5 digits, with the fingers being only slightly elongated compared to a human's. They didn't wear any clothes and had no features to indicate gender. I could still somehow mentally discern male and female. There were at least 3 males present. 2 stood around taking notes on what appeared to be stiff paper, with no sort of clipboard to support it, while 2 of the females ignored me as they fiddled around with various tools that were on the tables nearby. Somehow, I knew in my mind that these were aliens, only I didn't feel threatened or scared. It was like what we were doing was normal. It was routine. The 5th alien, a male, was kneeling and holding one of my legs, moving it as if to test the joints and tendons, making sure they were working okay. He repeated this with my other leg and both of my arms. His hands didn't feel much different from a human's, warm and soft, although the fingertips did feel a bit strange, like a flattened out suction cup or something. The air of familiarity surrounding this one alien was akin to that of a parent, maybe even more so, as I've never really felt comfortable around anyone my whole life. The way he touched me seemed to be delicate and caring, as if he were afraid of hurting or scaring me. I watched as he tested each of my joints, occasionally looking around at the other aliens, who didn't seem interested in me at all beyond observational information. Then I'm suddenly standing on one of the docks overlooking the lake. Moonlight is reflecting off the surface of it, shining the same blue as the metal of that room. The same alien from before was standing in front of me, handing me a sandwich that looked like lettuce between two pieces of white bread. I took a bite. It tasted like bottled water, not bread or lettuce at all. I tried handing it back to him, saying I don't like it, but he gently pushed it back at me with one of his hands, insisting, I think telepathically, that I needed to eat it. Things after this point are blank, and I suddenly woke up on the sofa of my parents' camper the next morning. I think maybe the sandwich thing was some sort of food that was meant to make me lose my memory. But as I ate only a single bite, I was able to retain much more than I was supposed to. 15 years later after this, I'm living in the middle of cow pastures, cornfields, and soybean crops in Hawarden, Iowa. Basically the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend at the time was spending time with his brother, who was crashing on our sofa watching TV in the living room. I had opted to go to bed early, so as to not have to bear the obnoxious flatulence and boredom that always came with these two when we hung out. At some point, I'd finally fallen asleep, but I was awakened when my boyfriend came to bed. I exited the bedroom, which opened into the living room, and saw his brother sleeping on the sofa with the TV on. It was then that I, for some inexplicable reason, left the house through the kitchen, out the front door, and walked alone in the dark into one of the recently cultivated cornfields. It was merely rough stalks sticking about 2 inches out of the ground at that point, when a light began to shine on me from above. I shielded my eyes, searching for the source. It was coming from a rather modest-sized aircraft, flat on the bottom except for domes that were emitting the light. The whole craft seemed to be only about 15 feet in diameter, with a hole in the center that opened up into a red-lit room. I smiled, though. I didn't feel panic, as I knew my old friends had come to visit again. Possible alien abduction from SADIMIR. For some background, this happened a few years ago. I was maybe 16 or 17 living in my previous home. I have severe asthma, and my mother is an insomniac, so on days when my asthma is bad, she would check on me in my sleep to make sure that I didn't stop breathing out of nowhere. One day in particular, my asthma was acting up, and as per usual, very late into the night she came to check on me. The only problem was, I was not in my bed. Panicked, she looked around the entire house. All the doors and windows were locked and shut still, but I wasn't in any of the rooms in the house, not hiding or passed out in a closet or anywhere. Half an hour or so later, she came back to my bedroom, but somehow, I was in there, sleeping, like I had never left. When I woke up the next day, my mom asked me where I went the previous night. I had no idea what she was talking about and expressed this to her. She had grown concerned visibly and explained the whole thing to me. The funniest thing is that I could recall dreams of bright white lights with black shadows moving in front of them, almost as if I had been on an operating table. I also had sudden, inexplicable bruises and marks on my body, but I could not recall how I got them, but they certainly weren't there the day before. Now, the area that I live in has a very strong military presence, and UFO sightings are quite common. I've even personally seen multiple in the 6 or so years that I'd been living there. One instance in particular I was going to play Magic the Gathering at my local shop when all of a sudden, my family and I spotted an orange circle in the sky. My mom thought it was the moon at first, but my brother and I noticed that it was moving across the sky. Once we pulled over, she had noticed this too, and the way it was moving was quite odd and erratic. This happened across the street from where I worked, so I was telling one of my night shift managers about it. Funnily enough, he experienced the same thing about 20 years earlier in the same exact spot. I don't know what it is with military bases and UFOs, but I theorize either the aliens are keeping an eye on us, or the government has technology far greater than we understand. I think an alien or UFO followed me home. From Anonymous. I'm open to any comments and theories as to what this may have been. It was around the early 2000s. I was 8 years old. We lived in a rural setting, so when it's nighttime, I usually heard the farm animals my family owns making noises or rustling around in the cornfield a few feet away from my window. I was going to have a sleepover with my friend C tomorrow at his house. I should also probably mention that on the opposite side of the cornfield to the right side of my house was a forest that housed a creek. I was out playing at that creek all day, and when the sun was beginning to set, I decided to leave. Just then, I heard an animal growl, but it didn't sound right. It was more out of this world, literally. When I turned to look, I saw something with pitch black eyes and scaly skin looking at me from 8 feet away from where I was positioned in the creek. I decided to make a beeline to the tree line, which was 6 feet away, and then to the house, which was only a few feet from the tree line. When I made it back, I did not tell my parents for fear of them telling me I'd made it up. My parents were especially quick to dismiss my claims as my imagination. Later that night, I woke up around 12:30, 12:24 to be precise, and I didn't know why. Not until I heard the animals making noises. Then they all stopped making any sound all at once. I stayed still for what felt like hours until I saw one of the cows named Brett get sucked up into a beam of light from the cornfield and what looked like a dark circular object floating up above before it all disappeared after a quick flash. The next morning, I learned that this was not a bizarre dream because Brett was still missing. The local sheriff had been called too. We weren't the only ones hit, as throughout the countryside, there were dozens of missing animal reports, which were particularly of cows. No one thought anything of it. Like in my family's case, the fence was broken, which had us assuming that it was either wolves or coyotes, or maybe they escaped or were taken by rustlers. Later that day, my friend C and I agreed to meet up halfway at a walking trail that led to his house, then walk to his house from there for the sleepover. I had everything ready for the sleepover and went on my way. A couple of minutes later, I heard something that sounded like a jet plane landing 4,000 feet away from where I was. It was weird, but I ignored it. But not too long after, that same animalistic, otherworldly growl came from the sideline of the trail we were walking on. It began to follow us as we jogged, then ran away from it. When we looked behind us, I definitely saw something. Something standing 6 feet tall on 2 legs with a predatory glare. C peered behind his shoulder and screamed at me to run, even though we already were. We sprinted to his house without skipping a beat. When we made it, we heard banging and screeching all around the house. That's when C called the sheriff and told him in a panicked voice that we were being attacked. He thinks that it was going to smash a window soon, and I told him to hurry from the background. He turned to me and told me that the sheriff was on his way, and when he arrived, he saw claw marks all over the place, Besides that, the animal was gone with no other trace. The sheriff notified both sets of our parents. Mine came to get me to take me home. The sheriff also said not to use the trails anymore because they might not be safe, and if we had to be outside, we needed to carry some sort of weapon. On the way home, I had my window rolled down, and I swear to God I heard a metallic sound ringing throughout the sky. I even saw some sort of circular metallic object fly above us. Later that night, C and I were texting, talking about that incident, and how strange and terrifying it had been. Later in the night, I heard that same metallic sound from earlier. This time, it was coming from around the cornfield. It was then that I decided to look out the window to see what was making the noise. I saw yet another circular craft around the cornfield. There were beams and flashes of light again. Yet despite how bizarre the thing I was looking at was, I found myself in a daze, walking back to my bed and just lulling myself to sleep. Next thing I knew, it was morning, and everything was quiet beyond my comfort zone. Even more of our animals were missing that day. My parents were obviously upset. The sheriff was on our property, investigating this new incident. But there was a new development. Because within the footprints of the cows and other farm animals, there was a new footprint that was inhuman, but unlike any animal the sheriff had ever seen. That's the way he put it. Thankfully, not long after this, these experiences and events stopped all at once. The time after, my parents were able to slowly replace the animals at a great cost. And I hope these things don't happen again. They're dangerous, they're expensive, and they disrupt normal life on the farm. Not to mention, they completely boggle your mind. The Red Ball of Light in the Sky, from Jack. I live in Staten Island, New York. This took place a few months ago. I went to my cousin's party with my family. I'm not much of a social person, so I was mostly outside. This party took place in a building next to some woods and in front of a graveyard. I was looking out at the graveyard to try to find some ghosts. I was really just passing the time, when something bright caught my eye. I looked up overhead to see a red ball of light in the sky. It was leaving a trail as it continued to go up. I thought it was a balloon of some sort, until it stopped and went abruptly right. And just like that, it took off, flying away at incredible speed, still leaving a bizarre trail of light behind it. I actually would have believed that I'd imagined the whole thing, if it wasn't for a little girl pointing up to the sky, asking if I'd seen it too. I nodded as I went back into the building. I'm 100% sure that it was a UFO. I only had one other UFO encounter after that. I was sleeping silently one night when something woke me up. A whisper told me to listen. I went silent as I started to listen to a noise that sounded like something above me. It was so loud I decided to look up outside through my window to see a white light that was so bright that I couldn't see anything else. 5 seconds later, I heard the same sound I'd heard that night, the sound of the object flying away. I'm not sure if it was alien in origin or something else, but it certainly was bizarre. I mistook an alien for my brother. From Isaac K. I'm a 20-year-old guy, but 10 years ago, something happened to me. It was a weekend night, basically like any other. My dad had gone out to play poker, and my older brother was watching me at home. Before he took off, my dad said we needed to take out the trash. He wanted it done before he got back. So a little while after Dad left, my brother and I decided to do it together. Now it's important to note that my older brother loved scaring me every chance he got, particularly using aliens and their mythos. So we got the trash from the bins and walked outside to the bigger trash bins. My brother threw away his trash bag with ease and disappeared into the darkness toward the back of the house. I thought it was weird he went that way. I assumed he was going to try to scare me like he often did. So I rolled my eyes and sighed as I struggled to get the trash in the bin. I'm a pretty darn short dude, and was even way smaller then. After getting the bag into the trash bin, I walked up our porch to go through the front door, and thinking my brother was still hiding out there in the dark to scare me, I walked to the end of the porch. That's when I saw it. A short and bulbous-headed creature stood a few feet ahead of me in the middle of our street, beneath a streetlight. So, because of the lighting, I couldn't make out too many details other than the shape. At first, I thought it probably was my brother, trying to scare me. I called out his name. Let's call him Gio. Gio! I called out. But the figure did not move a muscle and remained completely silent. I called out a few more times, louder. Gio, come on, man. Stop trying to scare me. Come back inside. Again, the creature did not respond, and it dawned on me. This thing was not my brother. I ran to the front door as fast as my short legs could stride, tears streaming down my face in panic, as I locked the door and then heard something. The shower was running. I ran and pounded on the door and screamed for my brother until he decided, obviously quite annoyed, to let me into the bathroom. He must have been in the house since he walked off earlier, hopping in the shower a while ago. When I got in, he was soaking wet in a towel, and the whole bathroom was fogged up. My brother finished his shower while I sat on the tile floor of the bathroom. I was too scared to leave his side. When he got dressed, he had me take him outside, and by then, whatever the thing was had vanished. Later on, the only thing I could figure the animal was some sort of alien. It had a short humanoid body and a large rounded head. To this day, though, my brother doesn't believe me. My Alien Story from ALZUROS. Every time I retell this story or even think about it, the hair on my arms rises. I was a young man, about 20 years old. There was a whole week where I had nightmares. One of the most relevant dreams I had involved being in this place that looked like it was underwater, like a marine-style bunker. Even though I was swimming, I could breathe somehow, and I could vividly feel everything, like the water moving between my fingers. I saw a man swimming in front of me. He was dressed in a jean jacket with long black hair, but he hadn't noticed me. I followed him, and he crawled up to something that looked to be a sewer opening. When he opened it, I saw 4 long tan arms pull him out. I decided to swim after him because I thought maybe it was help. I got to the lid of the opening, and as I crawled out, I was inside the underwater building. The ceiling was as short as I was, about 5'11", so I had to hunch over a bit. The walls were white but had holographic panels on the wall. I turned to find a hallway, and I began to walk down it. I felt fine at first, until I rounded the next corner. That's where I found a blood trail going into another room. Cringing a little, I carried on, peeking through the door. Inside, a tall, dark-skinned creature was tearing the guy's chest open and placing a strange-looking larva inside of him. They pulled out a magnet-shaped tool and it healed his skin back up. I fainted and I hit the ground. I woke up back in my room at 11 o'clock. 11 a.m. I'd overslept and I was covered in a pool of sweat. But I was paralyzed. Sleep paralysis. While this was a bit creepy, I was just relieved to be back in my room, back in the real world. But then I saw something that made my heart pound. I wasn't alone in my room, because there was a humanoid silhouette-like creature looking at me. It reached into my ribcage, passing through my skin easily, as if it was translucent. With all my might, I forced myself to jerk up and scream. But the figure was gone, and with it, the door suddenly slammed shut. I put my feet on the floor and grabbed my field knife, opening my door. I was just in time to hear the front door slam shut too. Whatever it was had left the house in a hurry. Everyone else was sleeping, as if they hadn't heard the doors being opened and shut so loud, as if they hadn't heard me screaming. I have no idea what happened to me that day, but it was definitely quite real. You can call the first part a nightmare, but nightmares don't bleed into reality. My mother was abducted by aliens. From MAIYAMOO. Ever since we moved into this house on Black Ranch Road, my family and I have experienced awful things. This story is about the time my mom was abducted by aliens. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy. I wouldn't have believed it myself if it weren't for these two pieces of convincing evidence. It was a couple of years ago. My mom woke up the next day confused, sore, and tired. When she told me what happened, I got chills right away. I'll tell you from her point of view. I had a weird dream last night, but it felt so real that I'm not sure it was a dream. I woke up in bed, but I could not move. I looked around me and saw that there were small gray figures standing around the bed. I wasn't scared at first, just confused. Then one of them stepped closer to me, and I saw his eyes were huge, and he was looking at me, trying to tell me something, I think. I'm guessing I fell back to sleep, because when I came to next, I was outside on the ground being dragged across the forest floor. I was lying on some kind of tarp or blanket, and when I looked up, there was this gray figure again. He was walking beside me, but I still couldn't move, and now I was scared. I didn't know what was going on, and I was being dragged through the forest at night. I felt as if I'd been drugged. It was hard to move my head, and I eventually fell back to sleep. The next time I awoke, I was in a brightly lit room. The walls were white, and I was lying in a bed. Next to me was a very small baby, and I knew right away that that child was mine. I could feel it so deeply that I began crying and reaching out to her. I knew it was a girl, and I knew she was mine. They let me hold her for a while, but the next time I woke up, I was back in my bed here at home. That's her story. Now I get that her story sounds crazy. It's just a dream, I said to her, and honestly I would have left it at that, until she told me the next part, which had me totally convinced. That night, she had fallen asleep with her jacket on because she was cold. This was a really comfy jacket, and she was too tired to take it off. The morning after the incident, she felt something prickly and uncomfortable, and in the sleeves of her jacket, she pulled out fistfuls of pine needles from her sleeves. Now we both know darn well that she had not gone to sleep with pine needles in her jacket. We're convinced that while she was being dragged through the forest floor, pine needles had gotten jammed into her jacket. The second piece of convincing evidence is that for months before this, my mom had been having trouble with her fallopian tubes. She was in constant pain, eventually forced to have surgery, and this tells me that something had been messing around with her insides. We firmly believe that she had been abducted by aliens months before this. They'd caused her to get pregnant, and then eventually had given birth to this baby alien hybrid. I know it sounds nuts, but we've looked up many other stories like this, and thousands of other women have experienced the same exact thing. Coincidence? Well, I hope so. I don't think it is. Well, if you haven't gotten knocked up by a sexy alien man, then I don't know where your life went wrong. Everyone's doing it these days. But maybe you already have, and you just don't remember. If that's the case, your otherworldly trauma will soon begin, and it will be a ticking time bomb. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want to share your story with us, go to darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link where you can donate on my Patreon, a link to my merch store to get some creepy merchandise, and my referral link to get you started investing with Acorns, which helps me out a little bit too. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 terrifying dogman and werewolf sightings. I commented, "The number of likes I get determines just how freaking delicious my meat is." And you guys liked that comment alone 3 times as much as usual. So thanks, I guess. My meat is going to be extremely tasty, you freaks. Random Weird Kid says, "Hi, what's up, fellow night owls?" Don't rub it in, dude. I used to be a night owl. Now my wife makes me go to bed at around 11. Finn Bauer says, "There's too many of them. What are we going to do?" Well, there's only one thing we can do. Get eaten by a bunch of sexy werewolves. Ah, what a painful, joyous way to go. Why am I saying sexy so much today? Anyway, Joe Garcia says, "Can hardly wait to listen to your video while I work tomorrow. Thanks, man. Keep up the great work." Thanks, Joe, and enjoy. This was a good episode. And I hope you don't get caught unless you're allowed to listen to this stuff. I used to clean cars for a living, and we weren't allowed to listen to anything but a crappy old classic radio station. Nothing better than cleaning other people's nasties, listening to the same 5 songs on loop for 9 hours. Every single day. And a confused user with the name Giggles the Panda but a picture that shows a skeleton mask says, "I'm so excited. I grew up petrified of werewolves, thinking they were outside my window or down the hall and sticking their head through my dog door in the bedroom. But now I'm obsessed. You're partially to blame. Thank you." Well, I couldn't be happier, because that's exactly how I grew up feeling about them. They're awesome cryptids, but also the most terrifying to me. They're the only one I have weekly nightmares about. I mean, they could easily bust through any window, so if they existed, we'd just be sitting ducks. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.